So, thank you guys for coming. It's a pretty small setting, and appreciate every one of you guys showing up. But today we're going to be talking about physical health, exercise, and the nutrition behind what makes the exercise work, what makes your body function. So I think the most important part is why the exercise itself is so important to not only your physiological health, but also to you mentally and to your character in terms of discipline. And this buzzword that we're going to be using a lot during the presentation is self-efficacy. So I'm sure you guys are all familiar with the direct benefits of exercise being physical. So let's start with a small information dump. This is unfortunate because I don't think you guys can see this. But this is a list of all the long-term benefits of physical exercise. And the first thing that's listed is cardiac hypertrophy. That honestly kind of sounds a bit like a disease, but I promise it's not. It's the strengthening of your heart muscles. And the second thing is increased stroke volume. That sounds really bad too. More stroke sounds really bad. But the stroke volume refers to the efficiency of your left ventricle and how much blood is actually able to displace per pump. So I just wanted to clarify that in case you guys are wondering. You probably weren't because you can't read the chart. But the common theme throughout all the long-term effects of exercise are all things that you'd expect. So there's the hypertrophy of muscles, which basically means, in layman's terms, gains. And there's also something that is less obvious to the average person, which is increase in energy and how the body uses energy. So we see with exercise that people have an increased metabolism, have lower heart rates, which means their hearts are working more efficiently with the energy they do have. And there's a lot of obviously positive effects. You guys already know this. But what I think is more surprising about exercise is how it actually affects your day-to-day mood and emotions. So the University of Missouri of Columbia, not quite the Ivy League, but it's still an excellent school, I promise. They did a study amongst adult individuals about a control group of non-exercising individuals and a control group of individuals who did not exercise, but then were exercise compliant, which means that they committed themselves to an exercise program for a set period of time. And what the tests were aimed at were basically psych evals. So the study aims to assess the depressive, anxietal, and self-image symptoms in these individuals before and after exercising. So another small information dump, last one I promise. So to break this down, the depression and tension anxiety tests. Quick question, can you guys read this?
Not really.
All this is meaningless. So there were 3 types of tests that were done. So the first were depression and anxiety POMS tests, and those were basically word affinity tests. So people were given a word like despair, which sounds really bad, but then you rate it on a scale between 1 and 10. How connected do you feel to that word? And the higher the score, obviously the worse off you were. So the second test were the STAI state anxiety tests. Those were similar to the word affinity ones, but tested questions like how much do you agree with these statements? And obviously the more you agreed with the anxiety conducive statements, the worse of of the score, I guess, you got on the eval. And then finally, there's POMS vigor and TSCS self-evals, which were, I guess, very subjective evaluations of self in terms of how they feel they're doing as an individual before and after their exercise. So if we were in a better situation, you guys would see these numbers, and you would see that there's a significant difference between these numbers. But all that, I guess you guys just have to take my word for it.
You could like stand up with a walk around. If you want. You don't have to.
Sure. So, if you guys look at the chart, you'll see two rows of numbers. The numbers in parentheses are the standard deviation of that data set. So, if you know anything about statistics, this data is not actually statistically significant, but that's because this is a psych study. Psych isn't a real science.
I
just said that out loud.
Well, it's a social science. It's not a hard science.
Yeah, that's right.
But there is a heavy correlative difference between the scores before and after. And if you look at the means for each of these tests, which are the numbers provided here, you see there is a very obvious difference in the way people performed after exercising versus the way they performed during a sedentary lifestyle. So we see the results and correlative effects of exercise on mood, but why does this really happen? There's honestly not too much we know about it, but the Aussies actually had some decent insights on the matter. So one, everyone knows about endorphins, right? It's the very basic physical duress, makes you feel good. But then something else happens that makes you feel really good. And then something else happens that makes you feel really good. And I'll get to that in a second. But exercise, they found, is actually almost the equivalent to a prescribed doctor drug, which we'll also talk about. So this lady here, she's squatting. She's actually squatting quite a significant amount of weight, which is pretty impressive. But one, what's happening physiologically to her? So one, she's under physical duress, so of course she's experiencing endorphins. But these are very short term, right? So immediately after finishing her set or whatever exercise she's doing, she'll feel a small rush of whatever feel-good emotions. Some people describe it as a high. But secondly, I think there's a lot of stress. Like, exercise is very physically demanding and taxing on your body, especially while you're committing to the act of exercise. And this actually releases a lot of stress hormones known as cortisol. I'm sure you guys have heard of that if you're not familiar with it already. But cortisol is the stress hormone, and it actually happens to be released a lot during exercise. And something that seems pretty counterintuitive is that, one, it's a stress hormone, so you would think it'd work against your positive health benefits. Good morning, Charles. You think it'd work against your mood. And cortisol is also happens to be a muscle degrader. So it actually is a hormone that promotes the breakdown of muscle tissue. So why do we see that this increase of cortisol somehow leads to an increase in mood? Well, our fellow Aussies so graciously provided a study that showed that there is an enzyme. So your body works on a hormonal equilibrium, and because of an influx of cortisol during this short period of time, your body is forced to respond to it. Otherwise, it poses itself at risk to a toxic imbalance of hormones and just to basic physiological function due to hormonal imbalance. And what actually happens is that your body over the long term produces these enzymes that breaks down cortisol, and these enzymes, while they are an immediate response, do last longer than the cortisol itself. So what happens is that exercise acts as a means of creating a buffer between future cortisol levels and the stress you're experiencing. So I think that's indicative of I think that's why we can see the lower levels of anxiety in the test subjects from the Missouri-Columbia experiment. But I think the most interesting thing physiologically about exercise is that it's basically a drug. If you guys are familiar with these, on the right for you guys, it's the antidepressant known as fluoxetine. And then there's also Paxis, which is also another common antidepressant. And what antidepressants do, if you guys are familiar with them, is they are serotonin, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or they do the opposite, excuse me. So serotonin is another very important feel-good chemical in your body. Serotonin is basically a long-term dopamine in a sense, and it's something that will last throughout your body and determines your mood day to day. It determines a lot of psychological factors in how you perceive the world, just based off of how you feel, which I think is crazy. But what the study in Victoria, Australia determined is that somehow the science behind it is not exactly there yet. But somehow there's this correlation between exercise and an increase in serotonin. And what is thought to have happened is that exercise reduces your body's inhibitors, natural serotonin inhibitors, and therefore throughout the day you'll feel better, you'll feel happier, and I guess that moves us on to the buzzword for the day, self-efficacy. Yes. For those of you guys that don't know, self-efficacy is means the measure of which an individual is able to produce desired results based off of their actions. So for example, if you study for a test long and hard, and then you get a good grade on that test, your sense of self-efficacy increases because you studied, you were able to get the good grade. There's a cause and effect correlation. I think what happens a lot through exercise is that this sense of self-efficacy increases. So a study that the Gerontology Association of America did, do you guys know what gerontology is? Yeah, nice. One person. So gerontology is basically the study of aging and the social, psychological, and mental implication and physical implications of the aging process. So it's in essence. But I think we can learn a lot from these studies because we're not too far away from this, as scary as that is. So they did a 9-month study where they found exercise-compliant individuals. So going back to the idea that these individuals were consistent with their exercise, and they had a control group of those that did not. And of course, as we're discussing, those that partook in the exercise had a this one was actually statistically significant. The standard deviation did not overlap. And I wish I had a table for this, but I actually could only find the abstract. I had to pay money for the real one. But the results were statistically significant for this study. And what they measured in this, though, was people's sense of self-efficacy and how people viewed their ability to, I guess, alter their lives and what their actions meant for their lives. So this takes many more forms than just exercise. I brought up the example of studying. This also works in terms of how you talk with other people, how you form relationships. And it's just a lot of other factors that you have to consider. But I think exercise is that first step, as we saw in this study, towards a realization of self-efficacy, of this self-value that you know that your actions produce very tangible results. These people stuck to the exercise program for only 9 months, but there's cited increases of almost like 80% in how people deemed their own self-worth. I think that's something incredibly important for our culture today, especially, where we live in a world that is so focused on comparing based off of media, off of peers that we only see a small side of. And I think exercise is really a first step to understanding that you do have agency over your life. You have agency over how you feel. And there's something else. We'll get back to it later. Nutrition. I needed to use Comic Sans somewhere. So it's here. And so I just wanted to finish off this talk with the importance of other good habits, so that includes nutrition for exercise. So the good stuff, we all know that it's good to eat fruits and vegetables. You want your proteins, you want your daily lipid intake, you also want complex carbohydrates. But something that has been recently, I guess, demonized in health culture, for good reason, is sugar, specifically fructose. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So over the course of my life, this is all just from stuff I remember, I've been doing research through YouTube and my biology courses that I took in high school. But we obviously need food because it resupplies our body for when our body has consumed nutrients. It resupplies that energy that is needed to function in general. Like, the only reason we can move our hands is because we have food that has supplied energy that can be broken down on a molecular basis with those. Anyway. So what the general health trend has been through recent times is that complexity in food is actually better. So sugar is obviously an incredibly important part of your day-to-day life. You need it to live. That's why the first step in metabolism is glycolysis, which means the breaking down the lysing of sugars. And the thing is, though, that some of these simple sugars that we find in common day-to-day foods are, in fact, quite dangerous because they're so readily available. And I'm sure some of you guys will recognize this in glycolysis. So we see here 2 subunits of glucose being broken down into their 3 carbon components. And these components move through a cycle where atomically pieces are being replaced to form new bonds, which form a usable form of energy for your body. But the problem with the intake of glucose, the intakes of sugar, simple sugars, is that it causes quite a few problems. So sugar, I think we can all agree, tastes really good. Like, I love pastries, I like candy. But that's a pretty bad thing because it's so readily available. Evolutionarily speaking, sugar is good for you, right? That's why we started to like sugar in the first place. we needed sugar to survive, so we formed an evolutionary adaptation that allowed us to taste sugar, and we perceived that this is something that our body enjoys, and therefore it's a built-in desire from that point on to continue to seek out that sugar. So I'm sure you guys have all heard this statistic before, but sugar is one, a dopamine releaser, obviously based off of the reward system that we're talking about evolutionarily. You eat sugar, you get dopamine. But the same thing happens with crack. You get crack, you get dopamine. And sugar has been found to be equally addicting, if not more so, than cocaine. And the thing is here that sugar is a necessary compound for life. And because it's so readily available in today's world, that means that as we consume more sugar, we receive more and more of these dopamine highs. And I realize now that implicitly saying this, I'm saying that crack is also essential to life. It's not. But yes, sugar is addictive, and therefore we have an over excess of consumption. And that becomes a problem. That becomes a serious problem when we look at what it does to us physiologically, again. So if you guys know what leptin is, it's a hormone that is produced because of the presence of adipose in your body. Adipose being the fatty tissue around your gut area, like the other, what you guys know as like commonly, I guess, fat reserves. And leptin is actually good. Leptin is a hormone that regulates the breakdown of fats, regulates the breakdown of this adipose to turn into usable energy for the body. And what sugar does, man, the science is just not helping me today, but sugar, fructose, for one reason or another, desensitizes your body to leptin. So what we see as you increase your uptake of fructose because of the addictive nature of it that we just talked about. The less and less your body wants to break down the adipose, the fatty tissue, and the more it just wants to consume the fructose that's immediately available. And over the long term, the reduction of leptin in your body, regardless of whether or not you're still consuming fructose, will affect your metabolism and how it breaks down fats. So the last thing is insulin. When we consume so much sugar, when we consume these simple sugars over a short period of time, we see huge spikes of insulin in our blood sugar, because of high blood sugar levels. And this happens because high blood sugar levels is actually toxic to your body if not controlled. And what happens though is that this insulin system is meant to distribute the blood sugar into your cells for use, but when the bloodstream has been oversaturated with insulin, the insulin then becomes a selective, I forgot the word for it. It's selective, and it creates fat. That's what I'm trying to say. It takes the sugar, and stores it not into the cells where the energy is needed, but into this adipose. So we see this vicious cycle of addiction, and then desensitization of leptin, and then increase of further adipose because of insulin uptake of sugar converted into fats. Yes.
So that kind of be like how I know there's like a lot of morbidly obese people that like still will like eat large quantities of food, even though like evolutionarily you would think like with all that fat they would have all this energy.
Yeah. Thank you. That's something that I need to mention with the leptin is that because your body no longer is able to sustain itself through other forms other than the fructose, that means that we form cravings, basically. We form cravings of hunger, and this is the main reason why we see when people try to go on diets, when people try to restrict and say, like, I'll just eat less and be more active. That's why we see, like, they black out and then they wake up and their fridge is empty. And I think it's a dangerous cycle. So nutrition is another important part of that self-efficacy. Taking that first step and realizing that there are factors that you can control, and that through discipline and a certain amount of, I guess, confidence in your own ability to achieve something, you can get something done, and there are tangible causes for the problems that you create for yourself. So I think it's in our best interest to look at, watch after our physical health, if not for the fact that it's the first step in determining how much we can actually do for ourselves. These are the two highest quality pictures, coincidentally, in the whole slide, in the whole presentation. So let's compare the two really quick. One of them is delicious. Another one is also delicious. But one is an incredibly complex carbohydrate that one serving of will last you the entire day, and the other contains 72 grams of sugar. I'm sure at this point you guys can guess which one's which. But I make this point just to say that there are aspects. Actually, I don't know why I'm making this point. I'm really tired. But yes, exercise is good for you. It does a lot of good things for your life. It affects yourself in more ways than just the physical. And I think the physical results in a lot of positive self-image. It results in a lot of self-worth and self-respect. But we also see that it affects a lot of people's moods. And so I guess the whole point of this is to implore you guys to take that first step, just think about what exercise can do for you, or a healthy lifestyle. And I know this is by no means a thorough or comprehensive breakdown of what you need to do to be healthy. This is just a very surface level benefit analysis. But after I finish talking, I guess we can just talk about our experience with exercise, or yeah, we'll stay with that. Thanks.